Hey, everyone. Betrayal cuts deepest when it's from family. Amelia Carter, a brilliant architect, was sabotaged by her own husband and loved ones. But they underestimated her. She didn't fall. She fought back. And her revenge? Absolutely legendary. Stay tuned. Amelia Carter sat at the grand marble dining table in Victoria Hayes's luxurious Miami penthouse. The early afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. But the cup placed in front of her smelled off, an underlying metallic tang that made her stomach clench. Across from her, her husband, Ethan Carter, flashed a warm but strained smile, his fingers drumming lightly against the table. "I made this one especially for you," he said, sliding the cup closer, his tone too deliberate, too rehearsed. Victoria, elegantly dressed as always, leaned forward with an almost imperceptible smirk. "Ethan's been perfecting his coffee-making skills just for you," she added, emphasizing just for you in a way that made Amelia's pulse quicken. She wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic cup, feigning interest while her mind raced. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Over the past year, she had experienced unexplained illnesses, each incident suspiciously coinciding with critical events in her career, client pitches, major project presentations, important industry meetings. It had started subtly, a mild stomachache here, dizziness there, but 2 months ago, it had been worse. After drinking tea at Victoria's house, she had collapsed with severe dehydration and vomiting, landing in the hospital for observation. Doctors had been baffled by her symptoms, unable to trace a cause. Victoria had insisted she made the tea exactly the same way she always did. And Ethan? He had been by her side, feigning concern, but his explanations had always felt too convenient. Now, as she watched Ethan's expectant gaze and Victoria's thinly veiled amusement, an icy realization settled in. This wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. Amelia forced a grateful smile and lifted the coffee cup, bringing it close to her lips but not drinking. The sharp, chemical-like scent triggered a memory, the same faint metallic tang she had noticed in the tea that sent her to the hospital. Her instincts screamed at her to stop. Her mind worked quickly. If she refused the drink, it would raise suspicion, but if she drank it, she might end up in the emergency room again, or worse. Instead, she acted on impulse, shifting in her chair as though adjusting her purse, then suddenly stumbling forward, catching herself on the edge of the table. In the commotion, she switched her cup with Victoria's, steadying herself with an apologetic laugh. "Oh, I'm such a klutz," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her dress. Victoria waved off the accident with a tight-lipped smile, reaching for the cup now in front of her. Ethan didn't seem to notice the switch, but Amelia did. Now, all she had to do was wait. Amelia retreated to the doorway of Victoria's private study, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. She kept her expression neutral, but inside, she was bracing for the moment of truth. Victoria lifted the coffee cup, now the one meant for Amelia, to her lips and took a sip. Amelia clenched her fists, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Would it happen immediately? Would there even be a reaction? For a few agonizing seconds, nothing changed. Victoria chatted idly, tapping her manicured nails against the porcelain. Then, a sudden flicker of discomfort crossed her face. She stilled, blinking as if struggling to focus. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. It was happening. Victoria set the cup down abruptly, pressing a hand against her forehead. A faint tremor ran through her fingers as she reached for her water glass. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice unusually strained. "Something's wrong." Her skin had gone pale, and a light sheen of sweat formed along her hairline. She swallowed hard, her throat working convulsively as if trying to fight off nausea. Across the table, Ethan's smile faltered, his fingers tightening around his fork. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled, but Amelia saw the alarm flicker in his eyes. Then, Victoria swayed in her chair. Her hand shot out, gripping the edge of the table as though the room had suddenly tilted. Her breathing grew labored, her chest rising and falling erratically. I feel," she gasped, gripping her stomach. Panic flared in Ethan's expression as he abruptly pushed back his chair. He rushed to Victoria's side, touching her shoulder. then recoiled slightly at the damp heat of her skin. Amelia stepped forward now, her voice deliberately calm. "What's wrong, Victoria?" she asked, her phone discreetly recording by her side. Victoria's wide, terrified eyes locked onto her. Recognition dawned. Her gaze darted to the coffee cup. Then to Amelia, realization hitting like a crashing wave. "You switched them," Victoria wheezed, her fingers digging into the tablecloth. Ethan stiffened, his head snapped toward Amelia, his face draining of color. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. But the way his voice cracked betrayed him. Amelia took a slow step forward, keeping her gaze steady. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." Victoria coughed, her body now shaking violently. "Ethan," she gasped, clutching his wrist with a grip full of desperation and betrayal. "What did you put in my coffee?" And then he said it. The words that sealed his fate. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." Silence fell over the dining room. The truth hung in the air, undeniable and damning. Victoria's gaze darkened with horror, her body beginning to slump in her chair. Amelia reached for her phone and, with steady hands, dialed 911. "I need an ambulance," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Now, the sterile, fluorescent lights of Miami General Hospital buzzed overhead as Amelia paced the waiting room. Her phone clenched in her hand. She had played the recording over and over, making sure she hadn't imagined it. Ethan's whispered confession. Victoria's horrified realization. The damning words. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." There was no mistaking their intent now. They had tried to poison her. A set of hurried footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Dr. Morgan Alvarez, a seasoned toxicologist, approached with a grave expression. "Ms. Carter," she said, motioning for her to follow. Amelia fell in step beside her, her pulse racing. "Victoria is stable, but we found something concerning in her system." Dr. Alvarez pulled up a chart on her tablet, pointing to a string of test results. "The substance in her bloodstream isn't a common household toxin. It's a pharmaceutical-grade compound, one that isn't easy to obtain." Amelia's stomach twisted. That confirmed it. This wasn't some innocent mistake. It was premeditated. Just as the thought settled in, she heard a commotion down the hall. "Ethan." She turned to see him standing near the nurse's station, looking frantic. His suit jacket was disheveled, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke to a nurse. He was trying to get to Victoria. "Amelia," he called when he spotted her. He took a step forward, his voice low, almost pleading. "Listen, we need to talk. This isn't what you think." She met his gaze, holding up her phone. "I think it's exactly what I think," she said coolly. "And so does the detective." Right on cue, Detective Rachel Navarro stepped into view, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone firm, "I need you to come with us for questioning." Ethan's face drained of color. "Wait, no," Victoria was the one who. Dr. Alvarez cut him off, addressing Amelia instead. "We also reviewed your medical records from past hospital visits. The symptoms you experienced match what we found in Victoria's system today." She paused, meeting Amelia's eyes with quiet resolve. "This wasn't the first time you were poisoned." Amelia inhaled sharply. She had known, but now she could prove it. Seated across from Detective Rachel Navarro in the hospital's private consultation room, Amelia felt a strange mix of rage and relief as she played back the recording of Ethan's whispered confession. The detective listened in silence, her expression growing grimmer by the second. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup." Ethan's voice echoed from the phone's speaker, followed by Victoria's desperate gasps for breath. Amelia's stomach twisted. How many times had she ignored her gut instincts? How many times had she trusted Ethan when she should have questioned him? Navarro let out a slow breath as the recording ended. "This is damning," she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "But I need more." Amelia was ready for this. She pulled out her backup phone and opened a folder of text messages she had secretly forwarded from Ethan's phone weeks earlier. She slid the device across the table. "These messages prove they've been planning this for months," she said, her voice steady. "Look at this one. Ethan sent it to Victoria 3 weeks ago." Navarro's eyes scanned the screen, her jaw tightening as she read. "We just need to make sure she's out of commission for a few days. The Ocean View presentation is too important to risk." She scrolled through more messages. her brows furrowing. "He even talks about increasing the dosage here." Navarro murmured. "She won't suspect a thing. Just like last time." Amelia's fingers curled into fists. Last time. That meant the previous times weren't accidents. Every unexplained illness, every time she had doubled over in pain before a major work event, had been orchestrated. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. A uniformed officer stepped inside, a sealed evidence bag in his hands. "Detective, we found these in Mr. Carter's desk at the firm." Navarro took the bag, turning it over in her hands. Inside were several small bottles, their labels covered in handwritten dosage notes. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The officer continued, "They match the compound found in Victoria's bloodwork." Amelia stared at the evidence, her mind racing. He was keeping records, she whispered, like some kind of experiment. Navarro looked at her, her expression dark. "This wasn't just about making you sick for a presentation," she said. "They escalated. This time, the dosage was higher. If you had actually drunk that coffee." Amelia swallowed hard. She already knew the answer. She wouldn't have made it to the hospital. The day after the hospital confrontation, Ethan Carter and Victoria Hayes were formally arrested outside Miami General Hospital, their once polished appearances unraveling under the weight of their exposed crimes. Ethan, pale and sweating, barely protested as the officers cuffed his wrists. But Victoria, still recovering from the poisoning meant for Amelia, let out a hysterical shriek. "You can't do this. I was the one poisoned," she argued, but Detective Rachel Navarro remained unmoved, flipping through the damning evidence in her hands, the recorded confession, the toxicology report, the messages plotting Amelia's downfall. "You're right, Victoria," Navarro said, voice calm but sharp. "You were poisoned, but by your own plan. You just happened to drink the wrong cup." The courtroom proceedings began 2 months later, drawing widespread media attention. The case was a spectacle, a high-profile architect targeted by her own husband and cousin-in-law in a twisted corporate sabotage scheme. Every news outlet wanted to cover the trial, branding it the coffee conspiracy. Amelia, now under police protection, took the witness stand, her testimony steady despite the weight of her words. "The first time I got sick was a year ago, after a private dinner at Victoria's house," she stated, her voice even but laced with quiet anger. "Then again after a networking event, where Ethan insisted I try his drink. The last time I was hospitalized, I'd had tea Victoria personally brewed. The pattern is clear, and the evidence supports it." The prosecution meticulously laid out the conspiracy. Text messages between Ethan and Victoria discussing increasing the dosage. Bottles of the toxin found in Ethan's office, with handwritten notes detailing Amelia's past symptoms. Surveillance footage from Amelia's firm, showing Ethan sneaking into her office after hours, tampering with something in her workspace. The toxicology report linking Amelia's previous illnesses to the same compound found in Victoria's bloodstream. But it was Dr. Morgan Alvarez's testimony that sealed their fate. She took the stand, presenting medical records from all of Amelia's hospital visits, highlighting how the dosage had been slowly increased over time. This was systematic, she told the court. Had Amelia consumed the full amount in that coffee, we wouldn't be having this trial, she wouldn't have survived. From the defense table, Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands clenching and unclenching under the weight of his unraveling scheme. Victoria, still weak, shot furious glares at her lawyers, her panic barely contained. The jury deliberated for less than a day. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell into a tense silence. On the charge of attempted murder, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit bodily harm, guilty. On the charge of corporate sabotage, guilty. Ethan let out a strangled sound, his carefully built life crumbling before him. Victoria's composure shattered, her lips trembling as she whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." The judge did not hold back. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a cold, calculated attempt to eliminate a competitor, a person you should have supported. Not betrayed. He leaned forward, voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "Your greed, your jealousy, and your complete lack of regard for human life demand the maximum sentence." Amelia watched without emotion as her husband and Victoria were led away in handcuffs. their carefully constructed facades destroyed. She had once trusted them. Now, they would spend years behind bars for trying to destroy her. But she was still standing. And she would make sure she never let anyone like them steal her future again. 1 year after the trial, Amelia Carter stood at the podium of the Miami Architecture and Design Summit. The weight of everything she had endured finally giving way to a sense of triumph. The packed ballroom hummed with anticipation as industry leaders, executives, and young architects leaned forward, eager to hear from the woman whose name had dominated headlines. She took a steadying breath, glancing at the presentation screen behind her, an image of the Ocean View Resort. Her firm's latest, most prestigious project, the very project Ethan and Victoria had tried to steal from her. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, she began, her voice carrying through the room. It's about integrity. It's about the choices we make, not just when things go right, but when we're tested in ways we never expected. As she spoke, she thought about the long months after the trial, the moments of doubt, exhaustion, and anger as she worked to rebuild what they had tried to destroy. But she hadn't just survived, she had thrived. Winning the Ocean View contract had been the first step. But it wasn't just about business. It was about proving to herself that she was stronger than their betrayal. When she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. She had reclaimed her career, her reputation, and, most importantly, her confidence. As attendees lined up to congratulate her, a young woman approached hesitantly. "Ms. Carter," she said, eyes shining with admiration, "how did you manage to stay strong through everything?" Amelia smiled, considering the question. How had she done it? It hadn't been easy, but she had learned something valuable. "I focused on what I could control," she said. "I gathered evidence, I trusted my instincts, and I refused to let fear dictate my future." That night, as she sat in her office overlooking the Miami skyline, an email notification popped up. It was from the Ocean View Project Board, confirming their contract renewal for another 3 years. Amelia exhaled, a quiet, satisfied smile spreading across her lips. She glanced at her phone, seeing a news article headline about Ethan and Victoria beginning their prison sentences. But instead of clicking on it, she closed the tab. She didn't need to relive their downfall. Her focus was on the future, a future they had tried to take from her, but one she had reclaimed for herself. The best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about moving forward, thriving, and succeeding despite those who tried to bring her down. The story of Amelia Carter teaches a powerful lesson about trust, resilience, and self-preservation. Sometimes, the greatest threats come from those closest to us, and ignoring red flags can have devastating consequences. Trusting your instincts and gathering evidence when something feels off can be the difference between falling victim and fighting back. Amelia's journey proves that integrity and perseverance will always outweigh deception and greed. True success isn't just about talent, it's about overcoming betrayal, standing your ground, and refusing to let others define your future. In the end, the best revenge is thriving despite adversity.